You're watching Sky News. These are tonight's top stories. The number of dead from yesterday's violence in Egypt has risen to more than 525 now, with protesters saying that number could go beyond 1,000. Egypt's ambassador to the UK said protesters got what they wanted when hundreds of people were killed on the streets. And Barack Obama's called for an end to the state of emergency in Egypt and cancelled a joint military exercise due to be held next month. Well, it wasn't just Muslim Brotherhood protesters who bore the brunt of yesterday's violence in Egypt. A number of Coptic Christian homes, businesses and churches were attacked overnight. Well, I'm joined now by Bishop Angaelos, who heads the Coptic Orthodox Church in the United Kingdom. Bishop Angaelos, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, it's not only last night that Coptic property and indeed people have been attacked. It's been going on for quite some time, hasn't it?
Well, yes, and in the past 2.5 years since the uprising, there has been a general breakdown in law and order. And I suppose one place perceived to have been the point of least resistance was the Christians, because so many attacks went uninvestigated, and really with no support of justice.
It seems to me it's gone in two stages. The Muslim Brotherhood took power with President Morsi, and that was a time when Coptic Christians said life was difficult for them. Now, in a kind of period of refreshed lawlessness, it seems to be getting dangerous again. Was life difficult for the Christians when President Morsi was in power as an elected president?
I think it was difficult for the whole of Egypt, because at the uprising, Christians and Muslims together were very confident that it may be a new start. They wanted a new start for Egypt, away from the old regime. But unfortunately, that was guided down a more narrow path of just providing for one part of the community. And so while Christians were on the receiving end, you also have lots of people who weren't represented by that very narrow perspective that ended up losing out.
Now, Coptic Pope Tawadros II was present when the interim government was announced by General Sisi. That seems to have triggered again some anger from the Muslim Brotherhood, some random violence. Now, after what's happened today, there is a concern that some will pick up a cause of jihad rather than politics, and that could endanger your congregation more.
I think we've found ourselves in a position of damned if you do and damned if you don't. When we were reluctant at the time of Mubarak being taken aside, because we weren't sure what was happening, we were accused of being negative and not really proactively investing in the uprising. This time, when we said, well, maybe this is a new start, it's an interim government, and it wasn't only Christians who called for this, it was a large proportion of the community. And I think we need to stop with this Christian-Muslim designation. Although the last year has been quite catastrophic, economically and in terms of law and order and various other things, what it has done is actually brought the community together. So it's actually blurred the Christian-Muslim divide, the secular religious divide. What it has pointed out is that there was a particular Islamist divide that almost marginalized the rest of the community. And so I think most Egyptians now don't want to talk about religion anymore. They don't want to talk about Christians and Muslims, because some will say that what's happening now with the attack on over 50 churches in 24 hours was actually to instigate a reaction and then lead a spiraling sense of violence, and we don't want to really play into that.
Well, if I may say so, Bishop Angaelos, that's the first sort of hint of optimism I've heard from anybody in the last 48 hours. Do you really think that there is a section of Egyptian society which is ready to build and become a stronger force for compromise than the ones that are now being coaxed into this violent cycle of revenge?
I think the vast majority of Egyptian population wants to live a good life. Otherwise, why haven't we fallen into a civil war and a war until now? Why hasn't there been wider unrest? Because people really proactively want to move ahead, and they want to move ahead as a single nation, working towards a single goal. Now, as part of the uprising, there was a move to say that we don't want parties actually on a religious base. We don't want a presidential candidate that is part of a religious party. And even as a clergyman, I'm saying exactly the same thing. We're not interested in the Christian party. We don't think that religion and politics should mix. And so therefore, what we do want is a purely secular state that respects everyone, Christian and Muslim alike, that works towards real reconciliation, not cosmetic reconciliation that we've seen for decades, because that is getting us nowhere.
Okay, so what's your conclusion about what happened at Al Adawiya yesterday morning. Was that a step in the right direction or a step in the wrong direction?
It was a tragic time, the loss of any life, and I really mean that, because as Christians and as humans, we value life. So the loss of any life is tragic. It was unfortunate, and we feel a lot of pain. And I feel also pain for people who thought that they were in a position of prominent power and suddenly feel powerless. Because we felt marginalized for centuries in Egypt. But that shouldn't lead to a violent reaction. I think sooner or later there must be a resolution, and the resolution is going to be based on peace and reconciliation. And the sooner people start to work on that properly and realize that there is no gain in any destruction of property, whether it's government or church, there's no benefit in anyone dying, Islamist or otherwise, then we need to move ahead with that.
It's a noble recipe that you're describing. Do you think you have the ingredients there? Within Cairo, within the society, within the interim government of Adli Mansour, do you have the ingredients there to put this together?
I think there are ingredients. Democracy is a long path, and it needs to be followed, but it needs to be stuck to very, very precisely, and not let loopholes come in that bring us back to the point where we are now. If there's going to be a fresh start, it needs to be a fresh start. It's going to take longer now than it could have 2 months ago, because there's more death and more destruction, and there's more to be made up for now. But if we don't start today, it'll be much more difficult 6 months down the line.
Indeed, that is true. Bishop Angaelos, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today.